They stole a veteran's wheelchair, his only means of independence, and demanded a ransom to get it back. Linda Barlow, the ruthless HOA president, had spent years bullying homeowners with unfair fines and power plays, but this time she crossed the line. What she didn't know was that Henry Thompson's son wasn't just any man. He was a SWAT commander, and he wasn't about to let this stand. And when justice finally came knocking at Linda's door, it wasn't just swift, it was unstoppable. The morning was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The Texas sun had barely begun its slow crawl across the sky, casting soft golden light over the neatly trimmed lawns and picture-perfect homes of the suburban neighborhood. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of dew and freshly cut grass. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and then fell silent. It was an ordinary day, until it wasn't. Henry Thompson, a retired Marine veteran, pushed open the front door of his home and inhaled deeply. This was his favorite part of the morning, the peaceful stillness before the neighborhood fully woke up. He had lived here for over a decade, and though he often found himself at odds with the Homeowners Association, HOA, he had fought for this home. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. His routine was simple. He would roll out onto the porch, sip his black coffee, and enjoy the warmth of the rising sun. Despite losing the use of his legs in combat, he never saw himself as weak. He was a fighter. Had always been. He had learned to adapt, to survive, to push forward. But as he reached for the armrests of his wheelchair, expecting the familiar touch of its worn leather grips, his hands met nothing but air. Henry frowned. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the wooden porch, expecting to see it just slightly out of place. But it wasn't there. A strange sensation prickled at the back of his neck, a slow building unease. He turned his head toward the driveway, the small walkway leading to the curb, even toward the neatly trimmed hedges along the porch. Nothing. His heartbeat kicked up a notch. He pushed himself up, gripping the doorframe for balance. His cane was just inside, propped against the wall. He reached for it with stiff, practiced movements, his fingers curling around the smooth wood. A Marine did not panic, assess, adapt, overcome. Where the hell was his wheelchair? Henry took an unsteady step forward, pain lancing up his spine like an electric current. His body had long since become accustomed to discomfort, but this was something else. He swallowed down the frustration, forcing himself to keep moving. Then he saw it, across the street, outside the HOA office. His wheelchair sat there, positioned as if on display, but it wasn't just the sight of it that sent his blood pressure skyrocketing. It was the bold, red paper taped right across the seat. The wind rustled the paper, making the message flutter mockingly in the morning breeze. Henry narrowed his eyes, his gut twisting with a sick sense of foreboding. With deliberate effort, he took another step forward, then another, using his cane to steady himself as he limped toward the sidewalk. His vision tunneled, blocking out everything but the bright, infuriating red of that paper. By the time he reached the curb, he could read it clearly. Violation of HOA policy. Unauthorized personal items left outdoors. Property confiscated. Retrieval fee, $500. The words didn't register at first. His brain refused to process them. And then, his entire body tensed. A slow, burning rage began to unfurl in his chest, coiling like a viper ready to strike. His fingers gripped the cane so tightly his knuckles turned white. They confiscated his wheelchair, his medical equipment, his means of mobility, for a ridiculous, arbitrary fine. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out the distant sounds of the waking neighborhood. The injustice of it hit him like a punch to the gut. This couldn't be real. This had to be a mistake. But deep down, Henry already knew the truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, and whoever was responsible was going to regret it. Henry's grip on his cane was tight, his knuckles white as he took slow, deliberate steps across the street. His entire body protested with each movement, old injuries flaring up, his muscles stiff from years of wear and tear, but he barely felt the pain. Rage was a powerful, numbing agent. The morning sun had risen higher, casting sharp shadows across the pavement as he approached the HOA office. The small, pristine building stood in stark contrast to the storm of fury brewing inside him. The HOA, with its excessively manicured flower beds, crisp white trim, and ridiculous obsession with uniformity, had always felt like a petty kingdom ruled by a self-appointed tyrant. And at the top of that throne sat Linda Barlow. Henry knew her well. Everyone in the neighborhood did. The woman ran the HOA like a military dictatorship, treating the community rules like sacred law. She had fined people for leaving their trash bins out 5 minutes too long, forced a single mother to repaint her door because it wasn't the exact shade of HOA-approved beige, and even threatened to evict a veteran's widow because her lawn didn't meet community standards. Now she had come for him. But she had gone too far. Pushing open the heavy glass door, Henry stepped inside. The cool air conditioning sent a brief chill down his spine. The reception area was just as sterile and soulless as the woman who ran it. Beige walls, a single fake potted plant, and a row of HOA rulebooks stacked neatly on a polished wooden shelf. And there, seated behind an impeccably organized desk, was Linda Barlow herself. She was exactly as Henry remembered. Sharp features, icy blonde hair in a tight bun, and a wardrobe that screamed corporate power. She barely glanced up before offering a saccharine smile, the kind that never quite reached her calculating blue eyes. "Ah, Mr. Thompson, here to settle your fine?" Henry stared her down, his jaw clenched so hard it ached. That's my wheelchair." Linda's expression remained unchanged. She folded her hands neatly on her desk, as if she were amused by the situation. "Yes, and you left it outside. That's a violation of our community aesthetics policy." A cold, sharp silence stretched between them. Henry's fingers tightened around the handle of his cane. Did she just call his wheelchair an aesthetic issue? "It's a medical necessity," he ground out, forcing himself to remain calm. "You had no right to take it." Linda let out a small, condescending sigh, as if she were explaining something obvious to a particularly slow student. "Our rules apply to everyone, Mr. Thompson. It doesn't matter if it's a bicycle, a skateboard, or—" She waved a manicured hand dismissively. A wheelchair. If it's left outside and deemed unsightly, it gets removed. That's the policy." Henry could barely breathe through the fury rising in his chest. "That chair is not some abandoned piece of junk. It's how I get around. How the hell do you expect me to function without it?" Linda shrugged, completely unbothered. "Then you'll need to pay the fine to get it back." Her tone was so casual, so utterly indifferent, that it nearly made Henry's vision go red. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at this woman who held his freedom hostage over a ridiculous rule and a $500 fine. It wasn't about the money. It was about power, control. Linda Barlow wasn't just enforcing rules. She was enjoying this. His hands itched to slam them on her desk, to shake some sense into her, but he knew that wouldn't do any good. She held all the cards. At least, that's what she thought. Henry swallowed his rage. He wasn't a reckless man. He knew how to pick his battles, and this one wasn't over, not by a long shot. The evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Inside Henry Thompson's home, the scent of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes filled the air, a familiar comfort that usually made his evenings feel warm, safe, normal. But tonight, there was nothing normal about the tension hanging in the room like a storm cloud waiting to break. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the plate of food in front of him. But he wasn't hungry. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation with Linda Barlow over and over again, each word fueling the simmering rage in his chest. The sound of a car door slamming outside pulled him from his thoughts. A moment later, heavy boots sounded against the wooden porch, followed by the familiar creak of the front door opening. Alex was home. Henry's son had always moved with purpose, with a confidence that came from years of experience in high-stakes situations. Even before he stepped into the kitchen, Henry could tell Alex was in a mood, and the second his son laid eyes on him, the tension in the room became palpable. Alex froze in the doorway, his sharp hazel eyes locking onto Henry's face. "Dad, what happened?" Henry sighed, rubbing his temples. He didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to see the look on his son's face when he told him, but he knew there was no avoiding it. HOA stole my damn wheelchair." For a second, Alex didn't react. He didn't blink, didn't move. He just stood there, completely still. Then, his entire demeanor shifted. The relaxed, easygoing presence of a man coming home for a casual dinner with his father was gone. His shoulders squared, his jaw tightened. His military-trained mind processed the words in an instant, breaking them down with cold efficiency, like a threat assessment in the field. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. "What do you mean they stole it?" Henry exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. They said it was left outside and that it was an eyesore. HOA rules, or some bullshit like that. They confiscated it. Said I'd have to pay $500 to get it back." Alex let out a short, humorless laugh, but there was no amusement in it. It was the kind of laugh a man lets out right before he tears someone apart. "They stole a disabled veteran's wheelchair and then tried to charge you for it." It wasn't a question. It was confirmation. Henry could see it happening, the shift from son to soldier. Most people saw Alex as just another Texan. A man with an easy smile and a firm handshake. A guy who knew his way around a grill and never turned down a beer. But what Linda Barlow didn't know, what no one in the HOA knew, was that Alex Thompson wasn't just anyone. He was a SWAT commander, and someone was about to pay for what they had done. Alex Thompson had been in high-pressure situations before: hostage crises, drug busts, armed standoffs. He had seen things most people couldn't even fathom. But this was personal. The moment his father finished speaking, something inside Alex snapped into place. That razor-sharp focus, the ice-cold precision that had served him countless times in the field, took over. His rage wasn't loud. It wasn't wild or reckless. It was controlled, dangerous in the way only a man trained to neutralize threats could be. His SWAT instincts told him one thing. This was a show of power, and it needed to be answered. Henry had fought for his country. He had bled for it. And now, some power-hungry HOA dictator thought she could steal his freedom of movement and hold it for ransom? Not on Alex's watch. His fingers curled into a fist on the table. "They think they can extort a disabled veteran?" Henry exhaled, shaking his head. "Son, I don't want you to—" But Alex was already moving. With one fluid motion, he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number from memory. The line barely rang before someone answered. "Lieutenant Carter." "Get the team together," Alex said, his voice lethal in its calmness. A brief pause. "Situation?" "We're handling a case of illegal property seizure and extortion." "Jurisdiction?" "Mine." Another short silence. Carter didn't need any more information. "Understood. ETA? 1 hour. Meet me at my dad's HOA office." "Copy. We're on our way." Alex ended the call and exhaled slowly. Henry leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. "Jesus, son, you're bringing in SWAT?" Alex looked at him, expression unreadable. "No, Dad, I'm bringing in justice." 1 hour later, the quiet suburban streets of the HOA-controlled neighborhood had never seen anything like it. The distant roar of an engine shattered the peaceful evening as a black, armored SWAT van turned onto the road, moving with purpose. The vehicle was a beast. Reinforced steel plating, tinted windows, and the unmistakable emblem of the city's elite tactical team stamped on the side. Inside, 6 highly trained operatives sat in silence, their faces unreadable behind their tactical gear. They weren't here for a raid. They weren't here for a standoff. But the mere sight of them rolling into the neighborhood sent an unmistakable message. Power was shifting. And the HOA had no idea what was coming. The HOA office was dimly lit. The only sound inside the faint ticking of an overpriced modern wall clock and the occasional shuffle of papers. Linda Barlow sat at her pristine mahogany desk, her fingers delicately curled around a porcelain teacup as she took a slow, satisfied sip. She enjoyed moments like this, quiet power, the feeling of control. She had built her reputation on it, ruling over the neighborhood like an iron-fisted queen, enforcing her will with bureaucratic precision. Most homeowners in the community feared her, and that's exactly how she liked it. But tonight, that illusion of control was about to shatter. The door to her office burst open with force. The sharp bang of the impact sent a shockwave through the small room, making the delicate chandelier above her tremble slightly. Linda's teacup clattered against her desk as her hand jerked in surprise. A splash of tea stained the immaculate paperwork in front of her, but she barely noticed, because standing in the doorway was Alex Thompson, and he wasn't alone. Flanking him were 6 fully armed SWAT officers, their black tactical gear absorbing the dim light, their unreadable expressions radiating authority and precision. For the first time in a long time, Linda Barlow felt small. Her carefully curated sense of dominance, the quiet certainty that she could push people around without consequence, suddenly crumbled beneath the weight of pure, undeniable power standing in her office. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. What is the meaning of this?" she stammered, scrambling to regain control of the situation. Alex stepped forward, his boots heavy against the polished hardwood floor. His face was like stone, cold, unreadable, and dangerously calm. "You stole from a veteran." His voice was even, too even. "That makes it theft." He took another step. "You extorted him." Another step. "That makes it fraud." Linda's face drained of color. "This is a misunderstanding." The words barely left her mouth before Alex slammed a thick folder onto her desk with a resounding thud. Linda flinched. "Whoa, this is a legal notice," Alex continued, voice sharp as a blade. "You're in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. You will return his property. Now." The room felt smaller, as if the walls had closed in. Linda could barely breathe. For years, she had wielded HOA regulations like a weapon, treating people like pawns on her own personal chessboard. But now, she was the one being cornered, and there was no way out. The room was silent, but not the comfortable kind of silence, the heavy, suffocating kind, the kind that drowned arrogance, that crushed the illusion of control. Linda Barlow sat frozen in her chair, her back pressed stiffly against the polished wood. The usual air of authority she carried, the smugness she wielded like a weapon, had started to crack. The folder Alex had slammed onto her desk sat untouched, its presence looming like a judge waiting for a verdict. The weight of those words, theft, fraud, legal violation, had drained all color from her face. But it wasn't just the officers in the room that rattled her. It was the fact that they weren't alone. Her eyes flickered to the large office window, and her breath hitched. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, people she had once controlled through intimidation, fines, and carefully worded threats, stood in hushed disbelief, their murmurs growing louder. They weren't looking at Alex. They were looking at her. For the first time, the community was seeing her for what she was. Not an enforcer of order, not a protector of neighborhood standards, but a petty tyrant who had just been called out in the most public way possible. She could see the shock in their faces, the realization, and in that moment, Linda knew she had lost. Her hands trembled as she tried to summon up the fake composure she had spent years perfecting. But it was useless. Her voice betrayed her before she even spoke. I didn't mean to." Alex didn't let her finish. He took a step closer, his presence unshakable, towering over her desk like a force of nature. "You had a choice." His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. "You made the wrong one." Linda felt her throat tighten. There was no way out of this. No loophole, no legal excuse, no way to twist the rules in her favor. She had played her game for too long, pushed people too far, and now she was paying the price. Her fingers curled into her palms, the last shred of defiance flickering in her eyes. But even she knew when to fold. She let out a shuddering breath, reaching into the top drawer of her desk. Her hands shook as she pulled out a set of keys, the small metal objects rattling against each other as she held them out. She couldn't even look Alex in the eyes as she spoke. It's in storage. Please, take it." Her voice was barely above a whisper because she knew. She was no longer in control. The clinking of keys was the only sound in the tense room. Linda Barlow, once the undisputed queen of the HOA, sat slumped in her chair, her once pristine composure completely shattered. Across from her, Alex Thompson stood like a sentinel, his gaze sharp, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the SWAT officers moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving Henry's wheelchair from the HOA's storage room. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes to undo days of injustice. 5 minutes to expose years of corruption. But Alex wasn't finished. With his father's wheelchair finally returned, he turned back to Linda, his presence still suffocating, still unwavering. This doesn't end here. Linda's head snapped up, her already pale face draining even more. What? Alex's voice was calm, controlled, lethal. You're going to do more than just return what you stole. Linda swallowed hard, hands gripping the edge of her desk, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Tate. HOA will be issuing a public apology, Alex continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will resign from your position immediately. Linda's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Jade. And, Alex went on, his voice turning even colder, you will waive every single fine you've illegally placed on other homeowners. A sharp gasp came from the doorway. The HOA secretary, a middle-aged woman who had been eavesdropping from the hall, stared in stunned silence. Alex didn't turn to look at her. He didn't need to. The entire neighborhood would know soon enough. Linda's hands trembled, her jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might break. I can't, Alex leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make sure that every word cut deep. You will, Linda's breathing hitched, or I'll make sure you spend years fighting lawsuits you can't win. He let the words sink in, let her feel the full weight of her situation. She wasn't just dealing with an angry homeowner. She was dealing with a SWAT commander, a man who knew the law, who had the resources, and, most dangerously, who had the willpower to follow through. And Linda? She had no allies left. The homeowners outside, they had seen everything. Her own staff, they weren't coming to her defense. The SWAT officers, they were waiting for a reason to make this official. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths as she finally realized she was finished. A long silence stretched between them, the kind that only ever meant one thing: total, irreversible defeat. Linda's gaze dropped to her desk, her entire body sagging in resignation. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Fine. And just like that, the HOA's reign of terror was over. The Texas sun shone brightly over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns and tree-lined streets. But today, the air felt different, lighter, freer. For the first time in years, Henry Thompson felt like he could breathe in his own damn neighborhood. He sat comfortably on his front porch, his wheelchair back where it belonged, the warm breeze ruffling the pages of a book resting in his lap. His fingers traced the smooth edges of the armrest absent-mindedly, as if reassuring himself that it was really there. It still amazed him how something as simple as having his wheelchair returned could feel like a victory. But that was the world he had been living in, one where power-hungry bureaucrats thought they could push around the very people who had fought for their freedom. Not anymore. The sound of footsteps against gravel pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up just as Alex walked toward him, a casual confidence in his stride. So, mail came in, Alex said, tossing a thick white envelope onto the small patio table beside his father. Figured you'd want to see this one yourself. Henry raised a brow, setting his book aside and picking up the envelope. The HOA's official letterhead stared back at him. He let out a slow exhale before ripping it open with a firm pull. His eyes scanned the words printed in crisp black ink, and within seconds, a smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Well, would you look at that? Alex pulled out a chair, sitting across from his father as Henry read aloud. We deeply apologize for the recent misunderstanding. Mr. Thompson's property has been returned, and all related fines have been waived. Effective immediately, Linda Barlow has stepped down from her position. Henry let out a gruff chuckle, shaking his head. Should have just given it back in the first place, Alex snorted, leaning back in his chair. Some people only learn the hard way. For a moment, the two sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the past few days finally settling. Henry's gaze drifted toward the HOA office down the street, where a few homeowners had gathered, talking in hushed but excited voices. Word had spread fast. People weren't afraid anymore. Some were already drafting complaints, demanding refunds for fines they'd been unfairly forced to pay. Others were discussing changes, talking about how the HOA needed to be run differently, fairly. A shift was happening. Linda Barlow had ruled with fear, but fear only worked as long as people believed in it. And now, that power had been taken from her hands. Henry exhaled slowly, a deep sense of satisfaction settling over him. He looked over at his son, his unshakable, stubborn, no-nonsense son, and felt a surge of pride. "You know," Henry mused, stretching his legs slightly, "you ever get tired of busting down doors with SWAT? You'd make a hell of a lawyer." Alex grinned. Nah, this way's more fun." Henry laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he felt like this neighborhood was actually his home again, and no one would dare take that from him again. It didn't happen overnight, but the neighborhood had changed. With Linda Barlow gone, the once feared HOA seemed to lose its fangs. The ridiculous fines, the aggressive enforcement of arbitrary rules, the constant threats and intimidation, all of it stopped. For the first time in years, people in the community weren't tiptoeing around in fear of a letter in their mailbox or a citation taped to their door. They weren't whispering about the HOA in hushed voices at neighborhood gatherings. Instead, they were standing up for themselves. Henry watched it unfold like a ripple effect. It started with his case, his wheelchair, his fight, but it quickly became something bigger. Other homeowners, emboldened by what had happened, began challenging their own fines. They demanded explanations, demanded accountability, demanded fairness. For years, Linda Barlow had ruled the HOA like a tyrant, using bureaucracy as a weapon. Now, the people she once bullied into silence weren't staying quiet anymore, and the new HOA board knew it. Instead of enforcing ridiculous rules, they started listening. Instead of threatening, they started working with the community. The absurd fines were dropped. Complaints were actually heard and addressed. For the first time in a long time, the HOA was doing what it was actually supposed to do, helping homeowners, not controlling them. Henry sat comfortably on his porch, a contented grin stretching across his face. His wheelchair was right where it belonged, no longer a bargaining chip for some power-hungry bureaucrat. The sky had taken on a warm amber glow, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. The air was still, carrying the soft sounds of neighborhood life, kids riding their bikes, dogs barking in the distance, someone grilling steaks a few houses down. For the first time in years, Henry felt peace. He rolled forward slightly, resting his hands on the armrests, then turned to his son. Alex sat beside him, arms crossed, his expression relaxed but sharp, like a man who was still keeping watch. Ever the protector, even now. Alex exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. "Dad, if they ever try this again..." Henry let out a deep, genuine laugh, the kind that came from knowing you had won. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "They won't." His eyes drifted to the street, to the families chatting outside, to the newfound energy of a neighborhood no longer living under fear. He let out a slow breath, his gaze steady. Not after today. Justice had been served, and now no one would dare cross Henry Thompson again.